there is a new paradigm, and that new paradigm is there's enough for everybody. We don't have to fight each other to survive. And of course, we're waking up to a lot of truths. We are more connected than separate. We're only experiencing the illusion of separateness down here for the purposes of learning and growth of consciousness. And as we wake up and we start realizing things like nature is alive, and this is alive as human beings, a tree has a consciousness, and animals are important, and we start waking up to those new realities, we're going to discover that we are far more capable than we believed we were. Many near-death experiencers were told or shown alien life. One guy was shown this planet of intelligent flying beings. And so there were no doors at ground level. They had these openings in the sides of the buildings or the top. About 95% of the species are benevolent or neutral, and about 5% are sort of, acting out in fear or the dark side of the equation, and they're causing problems. But if you can't get past a certain technology, if your consciousness is limited, so the 95% kind of keep them in check. And what's very common with what these aliens say, with what near-death experiencers say, is that, we're all from the same source, we're all connected, love is the most important thing, and all these things that near-death experiencers say that the aliens seem to know very well, and we're just kind of coming up to speed, I think, in our society.
Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Christian. I'm joined by my fellow co-host Daniel. And on today's show, we have a special guest, David Such, a near-death experience researcher and author of God Took My Clothes. Very good book. I finished it. I recommend it highly. And welcome to the show, David. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Christian. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you. So as a researcher, I know for me, weird circumstances brought me to even researching into the near-death experience. What brought you into looking into near-death experiences?
Well, it's said in the Bible and other philosophies, sometimes it takes a painful experience to make us change our ways. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was living well, $180,000 a year job and making great money. And back in 1999, I came down with chronic tendonitis. It worsened over an 8-year period. I had been to over a dozen doctors. I had spent tens of thousands of dollars trying to cure myself. I had it in my hands, my feet, my jaw. I actually ended up spending 3 years in a mobility scooter. And of course, in 2019, with 20 years of that, I finally miraculously healed, and I'm walking 4 or 5 miles with my wife a couple times a week now. But I had lost faith in God completely because, I was a Christian back then, and the Bible says, ask and it'll be given. And I had been prayed for by a dozen churches at least and hundreds of people over that 8 years, and nothing happened. So I came to a very painful conclusion. And that conclusion is, well, there's either no God, it's all a lie. I didn't think that was true. Or more likely, there is a God, but, I'm a bad Christian. I'm a disobedient son. I'm the one that he's embarrassed of. He wants nothing to do with me. And that was a very painful conclusion. It was during that time, as I was thinking that day when I came to that conclusion, when I got up and I clicked on a random YouTube video. This is in 2007, so I think YouTube was only 2 years old. And back then, it was hard to find a near-death experience video on YouTube. And now there's more channels than I can keep track of. There's wonderful channels like yours. And so I clicked on that. It was about an atheist who died, saw the afterlife, and returned. And that got me started investigating near-death experiences. So here it is 17 years later, and I've heard over 1,200 experiences, and I've interviewed lots of people and kind of wrapped up in that world now. So it's been a wonderful journey. It's changed every aspect of my life, my relationship with my family, the way I view nature, and just the way I conduct myself on a daily basis. And so I'm really grateful to all the people who freely shared their testimonies with me, because it's a brave thing to share something like that. A lot of people look at you and think you're crazy, So right. I'm grateful to all those who are open about it.
Yeah, it really is truly enlightening. And I have to say that after hearing testimony after testimony, each their own subjective experience, and there are differences, but there are these core elements that remain the same throughout the many near-death experiences that I've gone through. And reading through your book, it was really cool to see that you've come to the same conclusion. And I'm sure you hear this a lot, but it feels like right now, through these what seems like tumultuous times, that there is this shift that everyone can like feel going on. And there are people kind of like waking up, and more people talking about their experiences, near-death experiences. We have in Congress, they're talking about non-human entities, and they have congressional hearings that are being planned after the big one we just had last year. So it's like this weird, it's almost like the universe is kind of like prepping us for this higher level of understanding, a new level of awareness.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. From what I've heard, there is what's called a great awakening happening. It's a shift in the consciousness of humanity. And it basically boils down to systems that served us very well for many, many centuries. And the old paradigm was this, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, when resources were scarce, if you wanted to survive, you were either going to be the one taking from others or the one being victimized. So what you did, and if you didn't do this, it would be like, what's wrong with you? You want to survive, don't you? You would attach yourself to a group, maybe a big family or an army or a powerful city or something as big as the Roman Empire, and then you would forcibly take from others. But now, with our technology, with our amazing communication skills, the way we're communicating now, with our mass manufacturing, there is a new paradigm. And that new paradigm is there's enough for everybody. We don't have to fight each other to survive. And of course, we're waking up, as you mentioned, or as you alluded to a lot of truths. One of those is that we are more connected than separate. We're only experiencing the illusion of separateness down here for the purposes of learning and growth of consciousness. And as we wake up and we start realizing things like nature is alive, and this is alive as human beings, a tree has a consciousness, and animals are important, and we start waking up to those new realities, we're going to discover that we are far more capable than we believed we were. We're starting to learn that we are the creators of our own reality, and that we will eventually learn to manipulate matter with consciousness. I mean, that's how some of the masters of the planet did their miracles, is by this manipulation of physical matter through consciousness. We have that ability. It's always in us. And we're like an F-35 jet fighter, that can go 2 times faster than the speed of sound, and we're taxiing down the runway, not realizing we have potential. And so we're waking up right now, and there's going to be this new world coming. And we're in the chaotic time. The dance of consciousness is 1 of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and we're in that step back. And that's going to be triggering a big change in our society. It's going to take around 150 years or so. But the big changes are coming, and we're right in the beginning of it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
You're talking about kind of how things have been for so long. Do you feel like with the new paradigm changing, with more sightings of, let's say, example, UAPs or UFOs, NHI, you have this kind of greater awareness growing? Do you feel like that is going to help a lot of religious societies or groups evolve, or do you feel like that could potentially be have a lot of upheaval until we get to more of a peaceful state of understanding?
Well, right now, religion is kind of stuck in the old paradigm along with the rest of us, and they have a very specific, each one has a very specific set of beliefs, right? But if you look at all the world's major religions, they kind of do promote the same thing: brotherly love, charity for the impoverished, kindness, gentleness, forgiveness, self-control. And so we're more on the same page than we are on different pages. And people think when this, enlightened society comes in, religion's going to go away. Well, no, it's going to change, and it's going to mature. And religion is eventually going to learn to respect and honor the way others in other religions connect with God. And it's just a tool. Some people need or prefer the structure of organized religion to connect with God. But certainly, I think as we see more UFO sightings and alien contact starts to happen a little more just step by step. I don't think it's going to be all of a sudden, a spaceship landing on the White House lawn. It's going to be done in phases because, They don't want to panic the society. There's going to be some pushback from religion, and they're going to say, oh, these are demons and things like that. But they'll eventually come around. We used to think that when there was eclipse, God was mad at us and blotting out the sun, and we matured out of that. And so there's going to be that growing up phase, but it's going to be tough for some people, but it's going to be like this, you're going to have to accept it. You can only deny so much when they are here physically with their ships talking with us. You're not going to be able to say, oh, that's not real. They're eventually going to have to accept it, and they will adapt and change and mature as they're maturing now. When I was a child 50 years ago in Catholic school, I would hear things that you hear things very different today. The story of the prodigal son, are you familiar with that? The two sons, and one of them says, I want half the inheritance now, Dad. I don't want to wait till you die. And the dad's kind of wealthy, gives him the half of the inheritance. He blows all the money, comes back, and wants to be a servant. I'm not worthy to be your son anymore. But he thinks, well, I'm starving. At least I'll get fed at my dad's house being a servant. And the dad welcomes him home with open arms. The Catholic priest who was giving this sermon said, you see, God is not going to punish you for being bad. He loves you no matter what you do. Well, I would not have heard that when I was a child 50 years ago. And 500 years ago, the Catholic Church was selling indulgences. Pay the clergy money to pray for your dead relative, and we'll pray to get them out of hell and get them into heaven. They don't do that anymore. They're maturing. And I think that maturing process is continuing, and it's going to accelerate.
And I often say, and I brought this to Peter Panagorg. You mentioned you met him once before. He was talking about his near-death experiences, and I had mentioned to him that I think that if you have a socially evolved and spiritually evolved species or beings or people, and they already have the understanding of what happens when you leave the physical body and that we're all energy, we go on forever, and they already have that understanding of what a life review is, then they would fully understand that hurting us or hurting others, even animals, would be hurting themselves, because that's what people who experienced a life review understand. And
yeah,
and in a lot of the cases that I've looked into, even people who claim to have been taken or anything mention that the beings tell them this, which is the same thing that near-death experiencers are talking about consciousness, the rise in consciousness, about source, God, whatever anyone wants to name it, but that we're all connected. And that's something that's expressed.
Yes, that is a common theme. So on the other side of the veil, we are all connected. We're more connected than separate. And down here, we have the illusion of separateness that we take on for the experiences of learning and growth. And of course, when you harm one human being, you harm the whole. And when you help one human being, you help the whole. So as we begin to realize this, society is not going to allow things to happen like 60,000 homeless people on the streets of Los Angeles.
Right.
That is low-hanging fruit. With very little money and effort, we can bring hope and joy to these people again. And of course, I heard this directly from a near-death experiencer. You bring hope or joy to just one soul, and millions receive the vibration because we're all connected. And just to give an example of how important it is to treat other people with kindness and love and compassion, and animals and even plants. I'll give you one little example I recently heard from a near-death experience. He's going through his life review, and in this particular case, he had thousands of beings watching him, thousands of spiritual beings. He said it was like a stadium full. Now, I got to imagine that's got to be incredibly intimidating going through this life review. And he gets to this part where he's got this half-empty bottle of water, and he's in public, and he doesn't want it anymore, and he's about ready to throw it away. And he's walking towards the trash can, and he sees this tiny little plant, in the sidewalk there, struggling to survive. And it's a hot day, and he thinks, oh, that plant's probably thirsty. And I'll dump my water on that plant before I throw the bottle away, which is what he did. And when he did that, that stadium full of beings erupted in a deafening cheer, like we would when our team wins the winning goal, at the championship game, which doesn't have much significance to the big scheme of things, but showing compassion for that plant, well, that means a lot to heaven. So that's how important love and compassion for others is, including plants and animals.
Right. That's my understanding as well.
growing with our awareness of how interconnected consciousness is, and everything around us is not separated, it's actually all connected. Do you feel like that is going to be the next conversation eventually when we evolve past this UFO topic, or we're maybe having more disclosure about kind of these fundamental realities? Do you feel like the talk about consciousness is going to be what comes next?
Yes, and my understanding, and it's from very spotty information, so this is a bit speculative here, but my understanding is our scientists will eventually figure out how to measure and manipulate multidimensional quantum energies. Now, I think it was a couple of years ago, and I can't remember which university it is, they measured gravity waves. So there are 4 known forces in the universe: strong nuclear, weak nuclear, gravity, and electromagnetism. Now, those last 2, gravity and electromagnetism, are both quantum and multidimensional in nature. And there are 2 more that we don't know about yet. But what I've heard is, as they discover how to measure and manipulate quantum energies, there's going to be this big aha moment. We are all part of the same source. We are all like an image on a giant projector from a single light source projecting into this scene that we're seeing on the screen, which is us, the game that we're playing down here. So that is going to really change things. And I've even heard, I think it was from a near-death experiencer that said, when this happens, they're going to say, oh, this is God, this source that we are all a part of. So science is definitely going to have a role in the realization that we are all connected.
Yeah, I honestly think that it's all like going to change not only like the medical industry, but like once we start incorporating like energy, and we know that energy and frequency, it's already starting. You're seeing places pop up all over that are starting to understand energy, scalar waves, things like that, and using that to like heal cancer and all kinds of things, and all kinds of like diseases, illnesses, and stuff like that. But it's really more, from what they explain, that it's giving your body the right environment to heal itself, because we all have that capability to do that. So I find that very fascinating.
Oh, yeah. And I've heard about that. We will eventually learn to speak to our cellular structure. I mean, today, a person can have something wrong. They can have cancer and not even know it. And in the future, we're going to be very connected to our bodies, and our bodies are very capable of healing themselves. The human body is designed to live about 900 to 1,000 years. And we just haven't learned how to communicate with our cellular structure. And of course, in the distant future, there won't be a need for doctors, because I've heard that if a person is sick and is unable to communicate with their own cells and heal themselves, the community will come around and, with the power of consciousness and thought, heal that person. I mean, we have that capability now. We're just not using it.
Yeah, I've come across things like that as well in my own research, and in hypnotherapy research. You have cases where the hypnotherapist is just surprised, and they're mentioning that they're like, if you could just speak to a person's higher self, the part of you that remains outside of the physical, it's the reason why you have like certain illnesses is to get your attention, to pay attention to certain things. And that once you find out what it is, whether that be even things like trauma or something that you never really dealt with in your life, and you actually turn to face it and heal it, a lot of times the illness will go away. And there are like doctors and things that don't understand this. There was actually, I believe it was Anita Morjani's near-death experience, where she had lymphoma. She was told she was going to die, and she crossed over to the other side. And they told her she had to come back. And she's like, how am I going to do that? My body's destroyed. And the being had told her that all illnesses start off energetically first, and that if you can fix the energy, then the illness will go away. And not only were they correct, because they told her they were going to fix the energy, it completely vanished. And the doctors were baffled, and they did extra tests, and they're like, I guess because in the realm of their level of understanding, they didn't understand that. So they just said, I guess it's just a misdiagnosis, when there's something, I believe there's something more going on.
Yeah, when you have a near-death experience and you're in that otherworldly realm, it drastically raises your vibration, and it rebalances your energy and probably your chakras and all that kind of thing. So you come back completely balanced and healed emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And that, just like that projector example, shines into the physical body. So it is extremely common for someone who is suffering, medical trauma or severe injury to come back from their near-death experience and heal very quickly. And of course, doctors know all about this. They've known about it for probably over 100 years, and they give a name to it to make it sound like they understand it, but they don't. And it's called spontaneous remission or spontaneous recovery, but they don't understand how or why it happens. Only people like you do.
Right. And there are so many cases like that. I find them fascinating. For the people that like a bit more evidence, and I know there are people who like that, I've had enough evidence for myself, but there's something called veridical evidence, and I explain that to people as like whenever someone goes through an experience, let's say they leave the physical body, and they're able to recount information they couldn't have known otherwise unless they were actually there to experience it. And it's even been known and said a couple times. Sometimes they'll share something that was said, and the person didn't necessarily have to even say it with their mouths. A lot of time it was a thought that they had in their mind. And it's something the doctor was thinking or said to himself in confidence. And they're able to recount that information or recount information from Aunt Sally, who's 1,000 miles away. And you're able to tell her that she was wearing, a white blouse, drinking, a champagne, having a conversation to her deceased grandfather just because she was just doing it. But she did that by herself all alone. And you tell that to her. And that's what happened during your NDE. And it blows her away, and it's just like, how does that happen? And I know that there are facilities and places studying this and other researchers, Dr. Bruce Grayson and things like that. But I find it fascinating. And I always bring up veridical evidence to people because I do know that skeptics never really bring up those cases, but I find them the most fascinating.
Oh, yeah. The communication that happens when you're out of your body. So what's very common in a near-death experience is one of the first things they realize when they come out of their body, they see themselves from above. It's either the scene of an accident or the hospital surgery gone wrong or something. They immediately realize they can hear the thoughts and feel the emotions of the people around them. Mm-hmm. And of course, people will ask these near-death experiencers, well, were you like a ghost? No, I was the opposite of a ghost. I felt more real and more alive than I've ever felt in my life. And it's kind of funny to listen to skeptics talk about near-death experiences because when you've interviewed people, you're a researcher as well as me, and you know the story that you ask them, well, how do you know you weren't hallucinating? And they're like, no. So when you're dreaming, you're in this different dream world. And you wake up and now it's like, okay, it's obvious this is the real world. There's no doubt in anybody's mind that, which world is the real world, their dream world at night or their waking world during the day. Nobody doubts that the daytime world is the real world. And that's the same way it is with the afterlife. It's just like taking one giant big step up to a higher level of consciousness. And they know it's not a hallucination. They know it's not a drug trip or something like that. But, they can't convince others of that, unfortunately. You just have to experience it to know.
Yeah, I often say that too. Once you experience, and I have experienced out-of-body stuff, seeing beings, things like that. So it's just weird because you want people to believe you, but at the same time, you can understand, having not had the experience before a certain point, that it's hard to grasp. It's just one of those things. And once, it's always fun to see them have their own experience and then they flip completely. They're like, yeah, it's actually real. Actually, yeah, it is real. So it's always fun to see that. And I think that that's how it's going to be for most people. But it's happening very quickly, it seems like now. So that is exciting to see, Daniel.
Have you found, like with your research in NDEs, what are like the main points that you found that are connecting over to the phenomenon in that side of things?
Well, first, let's just talk about the NDEs. Now, there's no time in the afterlife, so you can be dead only 30 seconds or a minute and have what seems like an eternal experience on the other side of the veil. And some people ask several thousand questions before they return, or they're given downloads of information, or they're told about the universe and so forth. And one of the common questions is, are we alone in the universe? And the answer is always the same. No, The universe is full of life, and there are countless other dimensions containing other universes that are also full of life. And this galaxy is full of life. Many near-death experiencers were told or shown alien life. One guy was shown this planet of intelligent flying beings. And so there were no doors at ground level. They had these openings in the sides of the buildings or the top, things like that. And so, yeah, I've heard about all sorts of different beings. One woman was shown these aquatic beings that lived in a very peaceful utopian society. And there's reptilians and insectoids and felines and just endless amounts of beings. But a lot of them look like us, some of the Pleiadians, for example. If you saw a Pleiadian, you would say, oh, they're German or Nordic or something like that. So in this galaxy, they are humanoid-like. So kind of, if you think about Star Trek, lots of different races, but they all kind of have 2 legs, 2 arms, a midsection, a head. And that's the basic design of most of the life in this galaxy. That's my understanding of it. And of course, about 95% of the species are benevolent or neutral, and about 5% are sort of, acting out in fear or the dark side of the equation, and they're causing problems, but their technology is limited. If you can't get past a certain technology, if your consciousness is limited. So the 95% kind of keep them in check. And what's very common with what these aliens say, with what near-death experiencers say, is that, we're all from the same source, we're all connected, love is the most important thing in the world. And, all these things that near-death experiencers say that the aliens seem to know very well. And we're just kind of coming up to speed, I think, in our society. But we'll eventually, be there ourselves. And like you said, they'll be emerging between science and religion, because what we have right now is science, that we call science, is a tiny subsection of the big science, spiritual science, if you want to call it that, the laws of the universe. So we're just seeing a little picture, and our minds are going to be expanded, and we're going to see a bigger picture as we advance. And we'll probably have alien help doing that. They're probably going to help us out with information on that. Have a rule about not interfering too much, because one of the highest laws of spirituality is free will. So, they may assist and, little hints here and there, but they're not going to come down and give us, quantum energy technology, because we're not ready for it. We'd weaponize it. And so they're very subtle, and they respect our free will. But yeah, we're going to get eventually lots of help. I've heard from NDEs that we will eventually learn how to communicate telepathically, which is far more efficient than speech. And we will have friendships with beings on other planets by communicating telepathically. No more need for cell phones. So I've heard strange things about in the future. It'll be this scenario. Hey, honey, do you think the kids might want to come over for dinner? And she says, hold on, let me ask them. Yeah, they said they're coming. So it'll be an interesting world when we develop that capability.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. And speaking of free will, because I bring that up a lot, that's my understanding of it too, with the free will and non-intervention stuff. I know that they step in during certain scenarios. There are reports of like them stopping our nuclear weapons, and that's it, never hurting anybody, but doing things like that kind of. And they keep saying that we're affecting more than just us whenever we mess with things like that. So that's like one scenario where they're like, okay, we'll step in here. That's a kind of like a big no-no, but everything else is kind of like, you kind of have to learn, because, you can't force a toddler to walk, they just have to figure it out. And another reason I bring up the free will aspect is that through my research, as I understand it, and if you could piggyback on this, is that even if we're having a negative experience, unless we use our free will to ask for help, usually they will often show restraint with helping us in day-to-day life situations. And I'm talking about like spirit guides, deceased relatives, things like that. Or even when someone has a hellish NDE, as an example. In every case that I've ever gone through, the moment someone asks for help or prays to God, God help me, God save me, is usually when they're taken and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll totally help you out. We just didn't want to force you to have to believe in like God or whatever. We're not going to force you or anything, but if you need help, we're there. It's always given. It's always love.
Yeah. And I'm smiling so much when you said that, because I was so happy to hear that, because I've said that many times, that in my research, about 3% of the 1,200 plus testimonies I've heard were hellish experiences. And I have never once heard a hellish experience where they called out to heaven for help and nothing happened. 100% of the cases, they are rescued. Now, in terms of the aliens, and I don't know if you want to edit this part out because it gets a little strange. When I first started getting information about the Pleiadians, they are supposedly our cosmic parents that help seed life on this planet. They have replicators and transporters, and there is a galactic federation of worlds, and they have something called a prime directive, where they're not supposed to interfere with primitive societies that haven't made interstellar contact. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you guys aren't even making up a good lie. You're copying Star Trek. And of course, I found out years later that Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, was sort of given that information. They arranged it because what was the consciousness of our society in the 1950s, before Star Trek came along, about aliens? Every movie was what? The aliens coming, invading, and destroying us, or eating us, or using our resources. You know, it's all negative.
Right.
And they kind of presented those ideas to Gene Roddenberry. Rumor has it, I heard it in one of his interviews, that he met a Pleiadian, and he was a member of a group of channelers in the 1950s. And I found the notes online. Somebody did scan the old typewritten notes and put them online. And some of those channelers were Pleiadians. So he got his ideas from Star Trek, or for Star Trek, from reality. And it was to introduce into the consciousness of humanity our probable future and an alternative positive scenario of aliens.
And I'm glad you brought that up too, because there is actually a specific episode of Star Trek with the kind of scenario that we're kind of going through now, where they were visiting, just about to get to the level of understanding of that they're not alone in the universe. And they were going very slowly with that civilization because they understood the implications of disclosing themselves too fast could cause panic, which was what was starting to happen. And
that was Next Generation, right? Riker was down there.
Riker was down there. And I was like, they have to know something, because based on my research, if I had watched that episode prior to learning any of this, it would have just been another episode. But like learning what I've been learning now, it stood out to me. I'm like, somebody knew something. I was like, when they made this episode. And because of that whole interaction, they were just like, well, you guys obviously aren't ready, because, you know, one of the characters ended up shooting someone, and it was just, they just weren't ready. They showed too much fear when it came to like controlling themselves, which is, we're kind of still there in that fear aspect. And I know, like you mentioned before, with them seeing demons and things. So I understand that, you know.
And there are other Star Trek episodes that have parallels to spirituality concepts. For instance, the one Inner Light of Next Generation, where Picard wakes up and he finds himself from this different society, and he's living this life, and he goes through the whole thing. And it was this space probe that shot a beam into his mind, and in 30 minutes he lived an entire lifetime in this different society. Well, that's what we kind of do with physical incarnations. And there was another one with the original Star Trek, where they go to this planet, and it seems like this garden paradise of a planet, but weird things start happening. You know, a World War II plane comes out and starts shooting at them, and a samurai comes out and attacks one of them, and others, it's good things. You know, I think Dr. McCoy gets these two showgirls that he remembered. And near the end, the caretaker of the planet comes out and says, we didn't realize you didn't know how this planet worked. It's a recreation planet, and whatever you think is produced by our machines below. So you can manifest anything you want with your thoughts. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're creating our reality collectively through our thoughts and consciousness.
Right. And I think that's also kind of how it works, except faster on the other side, because it's like what you consciously put into your attention, you can gravitate towards, whether it's a cabin in the woods, or even, you know, if your mind, you're more susceptible to fear-based thoughts, you kind of draw towards that. So that's kind of my understanding of it.
Yeah, and they're all describing sort of the same thing. The most recent term is the law of attraction, and then
Right.
before that there was the phrase "be careful what you wish for," which kind of alludes that your intention has consequences. And then before that, there's the old Latin saying, fortune favors the bold. If you're bold and you set your intention on something, it looks like good luck is making it happen. Well, that's sort of the same concept. And even the ancient Aramaic phrase abracadabra, which in recent decades or years has been used by magicians, that's not its original meaning. Its original meaning was describing the same thing. And it means literally, I will create as I speak. So yeah, the hints are all there. And we're going to wake
Right.
up to the fact that we're directing our reality with our thoughts.
We had touched on earlier was miraculous healings. And another thing that I noticed in my research, and I know you've noticed in yours, is whenever someone comes back who doesn't have, or at least didn't seem like they had any lick of psychic or mediumship or any ability whatsoever in them, and then they come back with a little bit more empathetic, they are able to perceive auras sometimes, or they awaken new abilities that I think were always there. It's kind of like you open that door, and that door is just kind of still open. So a lot of what we're able to do naturally on the other side kind of comes through with them.
Oh, yeah. It's very common for somebody who has a near death experience to come back, even an atheist, and come back and they've got spiritual gifts. Like you said, some of them see auras, spirits, some of them become psychic healers, counselors, that kind of thing. And it's because their vibration is raised and their mind was opened. And so now they're open to these abilities that they didn't know they had, and they use them. One of the very early NDEs I heard, it was a guy, 6-hour interview, and the guy, he came back from his NDE and he's in the grocery store and he sees this woman standing there and he's getting this vision of this wedding ring in this dark, dusty place. And there's like this grating with light shining through. And he thought, well, that looks like the bottom of a refrigerator, underneath the refrigerator. So he walks up to this woman in the grocery store, nervous, not knowing what's going to happen, and tells her this vision. And she doesn't say a darn thing to him. She pulls out her cell phone, calls the daughter, and says, look under the fridge for grandma's ring. And all of a sudden, tears start coming out. She hangs up the phone and she says, my mother died recently and I lost her wedding ring. And I was so upset with myself. I don't know who you are or how you knew that, but thank you. So yeah, very common. And even people who only have a spiritual awakening or study NDEs or something like that will often develop these gifts.
Yeah, and it's so cool to hear those stories. And I went to a medium before who was telling me, she's like, you can do this too, and she's like, also, and she kept trying to drill into me that it doesn't matter if they say anything that doesn't make any sense to you, because the message is for the other person. So even if it's like, a rubber duck with glasses on, bring it up to the person that it's meant for and see what happens. And I've done that with miraculous results. It's weird. You feel weird saying it at first. You're like, I don't know why this person's telling me about this, but have you been doing anything with this? And that's what happened with my mother. Her mom came through, and I was like, if this is really happening, tell me something that I don't know that she will recognize. So she puts a pearl in my hands, and I'm just like, I don't know. And this is all in my mind's eye. That's how it works for me. And I don't see her lips moving. I just feel what she means. I don't know how else to explain that. And I was like, hey, Mom, have you been doing anything with pearls recently? I know it sounds weird, but your mom, she's more open, so I could tell her this. Your mom came to me and she told me, she put a pearl in my hand and she's referencing that for you. And she's like, yes. And I was like, well, what is it? She's like, well, your sister's birthday is coming up and we're making it mermaid themed. So we went to the store and bought a bunch of pearls. And I'm like, well, I guess that's her letting you know that's her awareness of that. Like, she's aware that it's her birthday. She's aware that you're doing that. So there's stories upon stories like that. So it's like those little validations. So I completely believe you. And it is amazing when it happens.
Yeah, little synchronicities. They're always kind of letting us know, hey, we're here with you,
Right.
And Shirley MacLaine, when she wrote her book Out on a Limb, and there's a documentary with that same name, I think from the 1970s, she talked about that same thing. And the phrase that got to her was, in order to get to the fruit of the tree, you have to go out on a limb. And somebody else had said that to her, and it was kind of that confirmation, like the pearls. So, yeah, they give us little hints all the time to let us know they're around, and they're still here with us, watching over us and helping us.
Right, exactly. And you had mentioned in another podcast that based on your understanding and research, you've come to the understanding that we've kind of passed a marker as a society, as a civilization, that we were being watched over. Like we were at the point where we could have killed ourselves, like completely destroyed ourselves, but we haven't. Would you be able to elaborate on that or go into that a little bit?
Sure. Lee Carroll, who channels Cryon, talks about this, and other channelers talk about it as well. But it was probably around about late 1980s, early 90s when we passed this point. So whenever we talk about the future, it is only the potential or likely future. Even those in heaven or connected to divine consciousness can only talk about the likely potential future because we have free will. So if I'm driving my car 60 miles an hour, going north on the freeway, you can say, well, an hour from now, you're going to be, 60 miles north. And well, I can slow down or stop or turn around or turn left or right. Well, we were headed towards self-destruction. United States and Soviet Union had thousands of nuclear weapons pointed at each other. We had the consciousness, we had the leaders who were willing to do it. And thanks to a lot of help from above, not just heaven, but our alien friends, we avoided a catastrophe. And I know, I don't have details about it, but I know the Pleiadians, our cosmic parents, who were instrumental in helping seed life on this planet. The rest of the galaxy thought that letting us dip so far down into darkness was dangerous. They said, oh, you're going to let them kill themselves. They're going to blow themselves up. But the further you dip down in the darkness, the more you spring out to the lights. Like, that an example I used in the book, you take a bow and arrow and you pull it down. And the more you pull down that bowstring, when you release it, the arrow goes up further. That's how consciousness works. It learns through contrast. And so no planet in the history of this galaxy has ever dipped as far down into fear and darkness as we did without destroying themselves. So the rest of the galaxy kind of learned from this. It would be like if we ran across some civilization in the middle of the ocean in a hidden island, and with 1950s technology, they were going into space and they had no sickness and they had, all their needs met and there was no poverty. It's like these human beings in this hostile, negative environment managed to pull this off. And so the galaxy has learned from that. And because the galaxy has learned from that, the universe has learned. And of course, that helps the creation process. So by what we did down here, which was considered risky by many in this galaxy, we pulled off an amazing stunt with a lot of help from above. And there was a big celebration. And now we are at the point where we're in the transformation. We're just at the beginning. And it's kind of scary, right? Because any system that we have, whether it's financial or political or social or business, any system that is not aligned with the new energy of love and compassion is either going to have to change or it's going to fail. So we're seeing a lot of old systems failing. Have you ever seen politics so divided? Have you ever seen, big corporations acting out in such greed? And it's kind of scary if you don't know what's coming. And the analogy I use is if you're a 5-year-old child and you're living in this house and your family lived in it for generations and generations, and it served you really well, but now the wood's rotten and the plumbing's leaking and the electrical's faulty. And when it rains outside, you got buckets all over the house and you can't patch it up anymore. And you've got to bulldoze it to make way for a bigger, better, modern house that's going to serve you better. If you're that 5-year-old child and you don't know what's coming, the day the bulldozers knock down the house, it's going to seem like the end of the world. But nothing could be so far from the truth. So Lee Carroll, when he channels Cryon, he says something that I like to quote. He says, get used to an acronym, SUCK. Slow, uncomfortable change. So we're going to go through some uncomfortable changes. There's probably going to be a good 50 years or so of some wars before there's peace on earth. And that's really going to be the first step. And it'll probably be, somewhere between 100 and 200 years before we have this new world of love. But it's going to be such a transformation. Think about the world 150 years ago. Farming culture, no electronics, no communication, no technology, very different world.
Right.
And that's how different it's going to be 150 years from now. So much so that if an alien came to the planet and looked at us right now, he would say, "Oh, you guys have had it. You're going to kill yourselves. You got all these weapons. You're fighting each other. You're trashing the environment. You're putting these chemicals in foods. Your medical industry's all messed up. You guys are going to extinguish yourselves." And if he came back 150 years later, his jaw would drop. Oh my God, what did these humans do? They turned this place into a garden paradise. How did they clean up their acts so quickly? And that's what's coming. So, I tell people, stay positive. You don't fear the change, embrace the change, and you never have to be part of the chaos if it's your intention. If a person, especially the kind of person that would watch a channel like this, is typically a better manifester than the standard, the average person out there in the default world. If you set your intention and say, it is my intention to have prosperity, both in health and finances, and be surrounded by peace and have meaningful, loving relationships and have meaningful work where I'm making a valuable contribution to society, and you have those intentions, that's going to happen. You don't have to be part of the chaos or part of the fear or, the riots in the streets and the burning down of cities that we saw back in 2020 and 2021. And probably we're going to get more of that, but just my advice to everybody is keep your calm. It's all part of the change. We're going through the terrible twos and we'll get through it. It takes time to mature. You don't go from being a 2-year-old child to being a 25-year-old productive, adult overnight. It's a big change and a long process with lots of mistakes and setbacks along the way, and that's okay. It's all part of the process.
And there was a near-death experiencer, I forgot his name, but he was, I believe, pronounced dead for over an hour. And on his way back, when he was getting sent back, he said, because everything's happening all at once, that's also another common theme for people that don't know, that they talk that time doesn't exist on the other side. So he's able to look forwards and backwards in the sense that he can see past lives or future lives and things like that. And he could see one of our potential futures and where we're headed, or the energy that we have right now, where we're going. And he saw us moving away from cities, becoming more loving, having more stronger, smaller communities. And he also said that we had jobs, but not in the same sense that we do now, where it's something unique about yourself that you love to do, and that's why you do it. It's not really for the same sense of money or needing to pay rent or anything like that, or a mortgage. But he said what he couldn't understand was how he got there, because he was like, how do we get there? Because it's just right now it doesn't look like we're going there because there's so much craziness going on. But he says that's the direction that's our heading right now, which is really good to hear.
Well, if you look around at the world today, you can see the beginnings of it all. So most of the major cities in the United States are having problems, right? And there's people moving out into more rural areas and small communities. And as the old systems break down, there's going to slowly be less and less manufactured products available, services available. And out of necessity, smaller communities, and these are the places that are really going to survive. The people that cooperate with each other, not the hoarders, not the super wealthy who build underground bunkers, they're not going to be the ones who thrive. The ones who thrive are going to be the ones who form communities and partnerships out of love and compassion, and out of necessity, they start cooperating with each other and doing things locally. We're seeing the very beginnings of it now. Co-ops, right? Managerless corporations. And there's a big one that if it were in the Fortune 500, it'd be one of the top 100 companies. It's over in Europe. So, that kind of thing. Farmers markets, we're seeing that now. Locally grown. These were not words I ever heard when I was a child 50 years ago. Locally grown. Well, what does that mean? Well, we're seeing the beginnings of the change. And just like you said, and I've heard near-death experiencers speak about it, these new communities in this new world of love that's coming are going to be communities of maybe 100 to 150, somewhere around there. They're going to look in their structure, just on the surface, a lot like indigenous cultures, where each member contributes to the community out of love for the community, not to get money and then I give you money and tell you what to do. It's sort of a selfish-based system we have now. It's going to be contributing about what you're good at and what you love to do. Imagine a world where your basic necessities are taken care of. You wake up every morning and you say, well, what do I want to do? Well, okay, let's get together with these guys over here and create beautiful gardens, or let's create this beautiful music, or let's create this beautiful civic center. That's a place where the community comes and has events. And so when we're not in fear mode, and a lot of people in this world are still in that survival mode, the animal that's got to growl and snarl and take from others, we're in that mode. When that's gone, that's going to really change what we focus our energy on. And that's what's going to be probably part of this new garden paradise, is the fact that human beings will be freed up. We'll have manufacturing, but it'll be mostly automated, remote cities. We'll have lots of technology, very advanced, and spaceships that can travel the interstellar distances of space, but we will very much be focused on biology. It will be discovered that biology is the best technology. And so we will limit our use of what we call technology today in favor of biological-based technology. Communication that we talked about earlier, mind to mind, instead of smartphones, we won't need smartphones. And we will eventually, and this is in 150 years, this is a long time from now, be able to do what some beings have developed as their spirituality raises, which is they can will themselves somewhere else and physically transport themselves to another planet. So we'll eventually develop that. And so, it's going to be a different world, a much more pleasant world. It won't be like heaven, but compared to today, it'll seem like heaven on earth. That's what NDEs have been told.
I've come across those experiences in NDEs as well, where they talk about what it looks like, and also alongside with people being put under hypnosis and also saying the same things, whether it's the higher self coming through or a future life that they have that they're connecting with, anything like that. They, word for word, they're describing what you just described.
I wanted to also correlate that information with, have you heard of Stephen Schwartz on
I
New
have
Thinking
not.
Aloud? Okay. So he is a researcher that back in the 80s, he had a pool of remote viewers, about 5,000, and had them remote view into 2050. And he made records of all the kind of decades of information that came after. They were able to successfully, heard about some type of blood disease that was being had been transmitted to humans in the near future. No one knew what he was talking about. They were laughed him out of the place, but he was seeing like the AIDS virus. They would remote view into like 2030. They saw that everyone had like these weird phones, like these screens that were they're pushing. Back in the 80s, or like there's no buttons. It's weird. But one thing that they remote viewed in 2050, that we would go through some upheaval, but around 2050, 2060, that there would be communities that were more based in agriculture or other kind of like these smaller communities, and that AI was being utilized for manufacturing. He also mentioned that there was different states that were more conservative, more liberal, the evolution of that in 30 years. There was no nuclear war. There wasn't, this like doom and gloom, but we went through some processes, but the society overall also accepted the wide understanding was that consciousness is in everything and that we're all intrinsically connected. So
the free energy stuff too. You mentioned
Yes.
the little box, that there is some kind of box or something that people have.
Yeah.
And then the people, because every time they were like viewing something that they didn't understand, like the way we wouldn't understand cell phones up until now, they describe this box that it's like something that's in everything, whether it's in a fridge or like a car, and it just runs everything, and it runs indefinitely, which is what they were saying. So that they don't know. It's just very interesting that's what
I've heard about that box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we talk about the same thing. So that is a 0-point module That's what they call it on Stargate, but it's 0-point energy. And it's a little box that just runs for very reliable 50 to 100 years, and it uses 0-point energy. Now, our scientists are working on it right now. That's the information I've heard from heaven. We're probably at least 20 or 30 years away, but possibly sooner. They say the spirit that was Tesla's is back already, and it'll be clean, reliable energy. Now, what they say today, just ignoring, all this NDE spiritual stuff, what science says is that in a 1 cubic foot of space, there is enough 0-point energy to run the United States for a year. So that will be the future.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before that, I've heard what's coming as sort of like a middle ground is low temperature geothermal. So right now you need to find a pocket of heat that can boil water. Well, they're going to come up with a system where it's a liquid or some substance that boils at a much lower temperature. You don't have to go so deep, and it'll be applicable to many more places, much cheaper. It'll be clean, reliable. Solar and wind are not the greatest technologies. Solar is very expensive, requires battery, if we're going to use it as a main power source, because every solar plant right now has to have a fossil fuel backup. We don't have battery capacity for that. It's too expensive. We don't have the minerals to build the batteries. And then wind kills birds. And the word from heaven is if the birds die, we die. So what we're doing now is not a very good renewable technology. We'll develop better renewable technologies as time goes on.
Right. And it makes sense too, because it's there's something that pilot, I don't know if he was a captain, but like pilot Ryan Graves, he testified before Congress that there were these craft flying every day. He's like, this is not just a once in a blue moon. He's like, these craft are out there all the time. And he testified under oath, and he said that we've never seen anything like that, let alone be able to fly around outside all day, which he didn't realize it, but I was just like, that's a very important distinction, because pilots in today's planes, even in like military jets and things like that, or Air Force jets, they have to refuel because you run out of fuel. But when you have something doing that, let alone in like Category 5 hurricane winds, not moving, just floating there, and they can get a visual on it, what is it using? Because it's probably not gasoline, or that's what comes to mind. And it's like they're constantly displaying this use of technology that opens up your mind to other possibilities, which I think we really need right now, because we're destroying the planet. But again, like you mentioned, we're kind of all becoming aware of that darkness. It's not just the darkness. It's like I'm seeing a lot of the awareness coming up. Like people are seeing the corruption and saying something about it rather than just letting it slide.
How do these alien crafts move? Well, we call it anti-gravity, but that's not what it is. Mm-hmm. It is changing the mass of an object. So Tesla did this 3 times, supposedly. And 3 times he watched an object from his laboratory bench fly up and hit the ceiling, mm-hmm. because it was massless and now it was lighter than air. So it goes up like a helium balloon. But he couldn't recreate it because we don't have, he didn't have the computers and that kind of thing. And so that explains a lot. If they can change the mass of their spaceship to 0, they can make a right turn going 10,000 miles an hour, which people have reportedly seen. And then the other thing they can do is they can they can have some mass to their ship and then create a gravity well in front of them. And
that's how Bob Lazar described it.
Bob Lazar?
Yeah, Bob Lazar.
I've heard of him. I did not know he described it this way.
He said you can look at it as if you were to take a bowling ball and place it on a mattress and put your fist down hard next to the bowling ball. The fist going into the mattress is kind of like that gravity well, and the bowling ball is the craft that just falls in indefinitely.
Yeah, there are these 3 cones that point, and where it intersects, creates a gravity well, and they can change the strength of that well. And it's the basis of that technology. I haven't heard much about it, but the basis of that technology, and this is wild speculation from very partial information, is high pulsed, high frequency DC energy, creating magnetic fields at right angles to each other in an argon matrix. So if there's any scientist out there, that may be the key to the land.
There was Dr. Thomas Vallone at the 2013 mock hearing, and he worked at a patenting office, and they fired him for exposing the truth because him and another person, colleague, I think friend of his also, were trying to expose that people were naively submitting these devices, which we would consider free energy devices, and or over Unity devices. It's like it required a little bit of power to start, but once it started, it just kept going. And they were finding scientific fraud, like manipulation, trying to say they didn't work. And he actually put up on the screen for the former members of Congress it's a mathematical formula for mass and inertia because it has to do with mass, exactly like you were describing, where the objects kind of become weightless. And he put that up on the screen, and we can put that up in an edit. But it is really interesting how it just all comes full circle, and you mention it. Very validating. I wanted to ask about, because I know it's hard for some people to wrap their minds around, but it comes up a lot in near-death experiences, is the life blueprint. And as I understand it, is that we each choose our lives and certain events in our lives, and we still have free will in the life to do certain things, but from the guides that come through, whether that's in a hypnotherapy session or near-death experience, they often say that that's true, that there is a blueprint, but as humans, we can't fully wrap our mind around it because it's kind of like my analogy. I use a tree. So the tree that goes out, you have the plan, then you have the branches that like spread out. Christian does this choice, and then it branches out into these other branches and so on and so forth. So if I get to this one particular branch, let's say, then I'm on, for lack of a better term, plan B. And if that, I make a different decision, and then it goes, but in the grand scheme of eternity, they have that understanding of what that life will kind of look like regardless.
Yeah, so I've heard about this. It's like pre-soul planning or pre-earth planning. So some people think, oh, that's control. Well, no, it's like putting out a vacation itinerary. Mm-hmm. And most people will follow the itinerary, right? It's pretty rare that you say, well, I'm going to Paris for a week, and you get there and you say, I don't like it, I'm going to Tahiti instead. It happens, but it's not that common. And the major events are planned out, and then the details are filled in by the human being. But it's important to note, the human being has 100% free will down here. We can deviate from the plan 100%, but we generally don't. And even some near-death experiencers were told that, okay, you're going to go through these difficult things. You're taking on these challenges to learn. You're going to be abused as a child. You're going to be in a difficult marriage. You're going to struggle financially, physically, all this other stuff. And if you're not doing well and you're way off track, then you're going to die here and have a near-death experience. Now, some NDEs were told, you are at a decision point. You did in your pre-soul planning, if I'm done with everything, I'll exit here. But if things are going well, I may want to go back to Earth and keep going. And so some near-death experiencers are told, it's not your time, go back. And others are said, they say, well, you're done with your work, but, with what you plan. But if you go back, these will be the benefits to your family, humanity, or that kind of thing. And of course, if I heard their testimony, they decided to come back. So yeah, you choose your parents, you choose the different roles. And, your mother in this lifetime might have been your sister or brother in the last lifetime.
Right.
And so we switch around the roles. And so just like groups of people go on vacations together, this year we're going to go skiing, in Nevada, and next year we're going to Japan, and we're going to do this. And then they have contingencies, right? They say, well, if it's going well, we'll spend another week there, but if it's not, we're going to do this. And that's all part of the pre-soul planning. There's lots of plans. People have multiple exit strategies, so you decide how you're going to die, and there's multiple choices, but the human being always has free will, and the human being always gets to decide. That's the beauty of the system.
That's what I understand as well, and I think that it's really enlightening, and but then I also see the side, because some people, like, I try to explain it, and then just based on my understanding or the way you explained it beautifully, but sometimes, like, when that comes up, like, it's the accountability thing, and it's just like, well, why would I ever choose to be, why would I choose this negative thing to happen to me, or things like that? And it's just like hard to like face that, but it's like if I have free will, but technically you use the free will to make a choice, even though you don't remember making that choice, kind of thing is how I put it. But that's what you've described is exactly my understanding of it.
You know, Alan Watts said, imagine if every night you could decide what you were going to dream. And, you know, you're an immortal being. You're going to have as many of these nighttime adventures as you want. And you might start off being, you know, the wealthy, good-looking, successful man that's the women are crazy about, and you have a wonderful family and a really meaningful life, or you go on daring adventures and rescue this person and, you know, or fight evil. You would choose like the Hollywood type scenarios, but it wouldn't be too long before you got bored with that, and you'd start taking on some challenges. Well, you know, what if I did this or chose a life of this? And you'd start taking on challenges where you learn. And he said, if you did that long enough, remember, infinite number of scenarios, you can have as many of these dreams as you want. You can dream as many lives as you want. Eventually, you would pick the one you have right now. And that's where we all are. We have picked these lives for the purpose of learning and growth and advancement of consciousness. It's a real thing.
I know one of my friends, they were crossing a bridge in a snowy area, and a truck was coming, and there was no way to get, like, they were going to crash. And they all like braced for impact. And then she said, all I know is I like opened my eyes and the truck was driving past, like we'd almost gone through it or something. She's like, I had no idea what happened, but it happened.
Yeah, sure. If they'll interfere if something's going to happen that's not supposed to in that part of the life plan, they'll often interfere. And then, of course, if somebody's in trouble, they have backup plans. I was told by my guides, for instance, you know, I was supposed to be a teacher, a spiritual teacher. And if life wasn't going well and I wasn't on track, to send the woman who is my wife to me to kind of help me and get me back on track and get me where I should be. And that's exactly what happened. So she was a rescue plan. I was not doing what I was supposed to do for a long time. And of course, they will often send somebody in. My friend Jerry, he got bit by a brown widow spider. He was my best friend from grade school. And then he's going through a divorce, and his wife left him for a business partner of his, and lost his home and all this horrible stuff. And when he was going through the worst of it, he was at this park, and he said, you know, I'm not going to make it through one more day. Now, he didn't say the word suicide, but it was pretty clear to me that that's what he was talking about. So he thought, well, you know, I may as well not waste the money in my wallet. And he walks up to this homeless guy in this park and says, you know, here, you can have this money. I don't need it. And the homeless guy says, no, you keep the money. I've been waiting for you, Jerry, and starts talking to Jerry. And he knows all about everything that's going on and really encourages him and was there for that moment when Jerry needed help. You know, so the angels will make physical appearances in drastic circumstances to get us back on track or to save us from a disaster that's not supposed to happen.
That's my understanding of it as well. And I have I know someone who told me about their experience like that, a car accident, and all of a sudden a being started talking to her in her mind. And it was like time slowed down, and it was like, you got to follow my instructions, okay? And then she just felt like she had to listen to this voice, and she did. And it was telling her to like bend forward in the car as far as she could and things like that. And then the guy like helped her get out of the car. Ambulance shows up. The guy's just nowhere to be found. There's even another story where someone is dying and the ambulance is coming and they can't get to the woman's veins through, I guess they were trying to inject her with something to help her. And this gentleman shows up who, from her perspective, she can't talk because she's under duress, but she sees him and she's like, why does this guy look like my ex-boyfriend or whatever? And he gets the thing in. He's like, she doesn't need a chopper. And don't worry, take the ambulance. And everyone is listening to this guy. And then he leaves. And then it's like they kind of snap out of this haze or something. And the EMTs look at each other like, do you know that guy? And they're like, no, I don't know. He had no badge on. He had nothing. And when it came through a session, a hypnotherapist session, as to why that happened, the guide came through and he's like, yeah, we have the ability to do that. In certain situations, we do that. And it's something akin to like not controlling people's minds. It's more like you just feel the influence that you have to do something. And that happens all the time. I hear that. I'm sure you've heard it through near-death experiences where I even heard of another experience where the guide tells the person, watch this, and they go through a doctor doing like performing a surgery or something like that. And it ends up being a really great surgery and things like that. Not that his skills didn't help, but it was like incongruent with his skills. Like they have the ability to step in and do things, whether we see a physical manifestation of them or not.
Yeah, and you'll hear about that completely outside of the circle of spirituality. There's this show on YouTube that I watch occasionally. It's called I Shouldn't Be Alive, about people who get lost in the desert or the mountains, and it turns into a survival thing. And one of the really common things you hear is, I just felt like I should go that way and do this. And that was the thing that led to their rescue.
Mm-hmm.
Or the story of on 9/11, guy takes the same route every morning to work, because New York traffic is horrible, right? And this day he just thinks like, well, I should turn right here instead of left, and he gets caught in a traffic jam for 45 minutes and he's really mad at himself for doing that stupid thing. And he finds out later it saved his life. And the guy's not spiritual. He was hearing probably from one of these helpers. And 9/11, the last woman, and I'm not sure if I've got her name right, but she's got her testimony on YouTube. I think it's Sharon McMillan, was the last person to be rescued from the rubble of the Twin Towers when they collapsed. Last one alive to be rescued. And her head was pinned between two slabs of concrete. Her legs were pinned. One arm was pinned. She only had one arm free. And it had been something crazy, like 30 some odd hours. And she was beginning to lose hope. And she prayed to God. And just as she's praying, one of the rescuers reached his hand through the rubble, held her hand, says, I'm Paul. I'm here with you. We're going to get you out of here. The rescues are coming. You're going to get out of this. And talked to her and calmed her down. And then just, she starts hearing radios and they're moving rubble. And just as they pull up the slab that they've cut and to free her, Paul lets go of her hand. And she's looking up at the rescuers and wants to thank Paul. And there's no Paul here. We were just digging through the rubble. Was Paul the apostle or some angel help? Yeah, probably. That's probably what happened.
There's so many of those, and it's amazing. And talking about 9/11, I have two family members, my mother and my uncle. My uncle decided not to go to work that day. He worked in the area or in the building. I don't remember which, one of the two. My mom was definitely supposed to go to the building, which is weird because she never goes there ever, but she was supposed to have lunch. And I've been near the top once when I was a child. It was a school class visit. And the lunch, I remember that distinctly because the lunch area was near the top. It wasn't at the very top, but it was near the top. They had McDonald's and everything up there. So she just canceled for whatever reason. So it's just like those weird things that happen. And so many people have stories like that where all of a sudden their shoes get caught and they stop to tie their shoe and they're having a difficult time for some reason. And then they avoid this impending disaster. It's just goes to show you that like usually if it's not your time to go, it's not your time to go. That they will step in those circumstances.
I mean, you guys heard Alan Watts. I'll quote him again. I rarely talk about Alan Watts in an interview, but the story of the Chinese farmer, you guys know that one?
I think I've heard of that one, but repeat it for those that don't know.
For those who haven't heard it, he talks about, there was once a very poor Chinese farmer and his only horse one day runs away, gone. And this is the disaster. This is the horse he uses to plow his fields and to go into town and get supplies. And the neighbors came around and said, well, this is horrible. And he said, maybe. And the next day, the horse came back, bringing with it 7 wild horses. And the neighbor said, well, this is great. You can train these horses and sell them as a big windfall of money. And he said, maybe. And the next day, his son is training one of these wild horses and it bucks him off and breaks his leg. And the neighbor said, well, this is awful. And he said, maybe. And the next day, the conscription officers came along, taking young men into the army by force, and they rejected the farmer's son because his leg was broken. And the neighbor said, well, this is wonderful. And he said, maybe. So the point is, the whole process of the plans and the creation process and these experiences that we go through, whether negative or positive, they are all for the benefit of our growth and consciousness. It is so complex that from our human perspective, we can never really judge a situation as being bad or good because we don't know the consequences down the road. You know, when I came down with my chronic pain, this was the worst disaster of my life. And yet without it, how different my life would be today. You know, I wouldn't
Right.
nearly have the peace and the joy and the good life I have had I not gone through that. So we never suffer in vain. You know, we don't come here to suffer, but often suffering is part of the learning experience.
Right. And what would you say, and this could be my final question only because I can go forever, I promise, but um, what would you say is the most important message that NDers come back with?
Love, every gentle thought, every compassionate deed, every unselfish action, no matter how small, giving water to a struggling plant, holding the door open for somebody, smiling and saying hi as a stranger passes by on the street, picking up a piece of trash while you're pumping gas at the gas station, showing love for Mother Earth, you know. No matter how small the act is, it is so important. It's what causes the growth of creation. When we have a choice, we're in the illusion of separateness, and we can choose between kicking the dog or petting the dog, being nice to this person or being cruel, and we choose the path of love. That contributes to the creation process. It is all about love. And many near-death experiencers are told when you've got to go back to Earth, and they are told you got to go back and change the world. And these people go, well, I'm a waiter in Bridgeport, Connecticut. What am I doing? I'm nobody. What am I going to do? I'm an accountant, you know, in Kansas. And they say, oh, no, it's real easy. You see, because the world's not going to be changed by electing the right set of benevolent politicians. You know, it's not going to be changed by pointing out all the bad guys and putting them behind bars. It's not going to be changed by electing, you know, putting the perfect set of laws in place to legislate a utopian society. The world is going to be saved and changed by one act of love and compassion at a time.
Thank you. And I completely agree with that. Even Chris Bledsoe, who's an abductee, has mentioned that when he started getting visits and he was in fear mode completely, dogs barking, freaking him out, freaking out his son, and there was multiple witnesses to this, so he knew something was happening. He took out his rifle and his gun and he went out into the woods. And the being was a smaller being standing in front of him, and he freaked out. He's like, he puts his hands up and he's like, he was so freaked out, he gave up. He's like, you got me, you know, do with me with what you will. And the being, he says, I don't know how to express this, but like telepathically or in my mind, gave me the understanding of the importance and the interconnectedness of all things, including animals. And he started like crying, and he was just like, he's been a hunter his whole life. So he's like, what have I been doing? And he dropped the gun. He's like, how shameful for me to like even think about trying to attempt to shoot you, you know, that kind of thought process. So I thought that was a really beautiful thing. And
yeah, we're still very barbaric. We're still coming out of the what's going to be called in the future the barbaric age. Yeah.
right. And where can people find you?
My book and a link to my spiritual counseling is at godtookmyclothes.com. My email is there as well. And at the time of this recording, I'm still answering all questions via a voice memo I send through email. And then there is a 2-chapter free download of the book in case you're interested in checking that out before you buy. And the entire version in Spanish is there. I guess it's not considered the same book, so the publisher doesn't have the rights to it. So if you speak Spanish, you can download the whole version.
Oh, okay, cool. I didn't know it was in Spanish too. That's perfect. Well, thanks for being with us on the show here today. I hope we have you here again. And for those watching, if you enjoy the episode, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And until then, we'll catch you guys on the other side.
Bad Monkey.